Imagine this. You have spent hours crafting the perfect legal guidance for your team. It is airtight, well-rehearsed, and spot on for what they need. And you hand it over to them, and you are just delighted because this is what they need. And then nothing. So you amplify and you say, because it's the law. Still nothing. If this has ever happened to you, you are not alone. You are in great company, unfortunately, the company of smart lawyers who have learned that being right is just the start, not the art. Welcome to the club nobody wants to join. Years ago, I worked in a company that was in a crushingly competitive environment. To protect the innocent, let's assume that it was an automotive company. So picture this. We were desperate. Sales tanked. Our engineers had been working feverishly. Our R&D team had spent our last $11 million on a product that would change everything. Introducing the helicar. Yes, a flying car that could lift off a busy city street just like a helicopter. It was genius. We were going to make money hand over fist. Our president's reputation was on the line. Promises had been made, not just to our parent company CEO, but also to the market. There was just one problem: a 25% failure rate. Every fourth engine failed. The fallout was coming. The showdown came between sales and engineering. The sales team wanted to launch immediately, while the engineers wanted to keep perfecting. So I was called in to referee. I listened to both sides, and I thought, well, this is a no-brainer. Sided with the engineers. Case closed, or so I thought. But to my surprise, the fight continued. So then I tried amplifying, and I said, because I said so. The fight continued. And then I decided I was going to bring the power of the office of the General Counsel to the table. And I said, because legal said so. The fight continued. So then I threw together this fancy legal memo with citations and footnotes. The works. I don't think anybody even read it because the fight continued. I tried so many different approaches to solve this problem. I tried the direct approach. We can't do that. And then I tried the regulations require, and from a legal perspective, and the age-old, because it's the law, which it was. Every single effort failed. In those humbling interactions, I learned the truth. Being right is not enough. Being smart is not enough. If you can't be heard, you can't help. So what do we do? Well, I had to learn, and I would suggest that all of us lawyers should learn how to speak the language of business. When you are in a law firm, you are a legal expert who is paid by your clients for your expertise. But when you are in a business, you're not just a lawyer who happens to work in a business. You are a business advisor who happens to be a lawyer. And all of that advice has zero value if it gets in the way of your stakeholders' strategic imperatives. So now we have to take a different strategy. We need to learn to speak business. I created the Bridge framework for business fluency. And yes, it's an acronym because we are lawyers and some lawyers love acronyms. The B stands for Business Impact First. In a way, it is a form of what I call corporate empathy, where instead of framing our interactions and responses from the legal perspective first, we frame it from our stakeholders' perspective first. So, as an example, rather than me saying, this really happened, rather than me saying, well, you can't use that AI tool because it puts the company at risk. It's actually what I wanted to say. What I said instead was, do you remember that company that spoofed our website? This really happened. Remember how they siphoned off our sales? Well, remember too how we stopped them for trademark infringement and violating and usurping our copyrights? Pay attention, because this part is crucial. If you use that AI tool, its terms and conditions give the owner of the tool a worldwide perpetual license to use everything that we upload into that tool. What that means is, had that bad actor downloaded our materials from this tool, we would have been powerless to stop them. Knowing that, do you still want to use this AI tool? Now you're talking business. The R stands for risk in context. Trade your four-letter words. So instead of using words like suit and risk, unless you're talking to lawyers and insurance people, because we love talking about risk, trade your four-letter words for words that will resonate with your stakeholders, like any of these: sale, burn, loss, gain, save, harm, cost, cash, fees, fail. And if you master those, you can graduate to even longer words like margin and EBITDA. As an example, what I might say is, instead of, you can't sell that product that way because it will risk a claim, what I might say instead is, wow, you know, it would be really great if we got that $90,000 sale. But if you sell it that way, it will cost us $200,000. We will have to take the product back. We will not be able to charge our restocking fee. You will lose your commission, and will probably have to pay the customer's attorney fees. And you know, unhappy customers tend to tell all their friends. We don't even know what the fallout will be when that happens. So, is there a way that we can work together to get you that $90,000 sale without it costing us $200,000? The I stands for invite collaboration. don't dictate, collaborate. Every single one of these strategies invites collaboration. And so you are always trying to get your business stakeholder to the place they need to in a way that allows them to feel empowered. For example, I once had to persuade an army of salespeople to obey all the laws, state and federal, that bound us as a company. My legal and compliance team had already tried. It's the law, it says so right here, unsuccessfully. So what I said to them was, look, all the laws boil down to these two ideas. Number one, be transparent with the customer. And number two, don't trick the customer. Not because it's the law, but don't you want your customer to trust you? One of our core values in this company is integrity. Don't you want to operate always with unyielding integrity? Now, some of them might be like, well, I mean, if I can get the sale. But, you're not always going to get the answers that you want, but you can at least move down the road to getting to the right answer by speaking the language of business. The D stands for data drives decisions. Speak metrics and not statutes. So instead of saying, well, if we price the product that way, it risks regulatory scrutiny, what we might say instead is, what would be the impact to our margin if we price the product more competitively? Same concern, but a different level and way of engaging. The G stands for give options. Options empower, ultimatums alienate. So along with, if we continue with the margin example, what we might say is, well, there are options for how we can price the product. High margin, medium margin, low margin. And what we notice is that actually the likelihood of a claim exists at the highest margin price point. Now, I understand that you have strategic imperatives that you need to get after. There are top-line revenue goals that we have as an organization that we need to hit. So given these different levels, where do you feel like you could land in a way that gets us competitive pricing, but also gives us the highest likelihood of having really happy customers? Solutions sell, problems don't. And so always think about what is the solution that you can, what is the end goal that you can paint? What is the picture that you can share with your stakeholder that gets them moving in that direction, because all you're trying to do is figure out, how do we get there the right way? And the E is educate through stories. Stories stick, statutes slip. I once had to persuade 8,000 employees in 32 countries to co-create a new document management program. And not only did we want to do a complete overhaul, but I also wanted to establish metrics by function in every country so that we had a defensible way of demonstrating all of the reasonable steps that we had taken to preserve our documents. And the reason we wanted to do that is because the legal function was growing increasingly alarmed at all of the million-dollar spoliation fines that seemed to be coming out of the courts, and we did not want that to happen to us. So here's what I knew. There's no way that I was convincing any of these folks to follow along with this plan just because legal was concerned about spoliation. So what I did instead was I found a story that all of them would resonate with: the McDonald's hot coffee case. So I would ask, have you heard about this case? And to a person, not only had they all heard about the case, but they would say, gosh, that is the poster child for frivolous litigation. Why, I never. Coffee's supposed to be hot. Who sues because the coffee's too hot? And then I would ask the question, if that's the case, why do you suppose the jury came back with a $2.7 million punitive award? Why do you suppose that even when the judge reduced it, it was still $640,000? Why do you suppose the parties ultimately settled that case? Well, turned out that there were more than 700 complaints from other customers who had complained about this coffee being too hot. Turned out that this particular plaintiff was not the first to suffer second and third degree burns because the coffee was too hot. But here was the punchline that I gave my teams. There are laws that require the retention of certain records, including customer complaints. And even beyond that, there are business reasons. There's like a whole layer of business case for why we want to retain certain records for certain periods of time. The goal of document management is not, as we learned in Enron, to shred everything, but it is to keep what you should, toss what you should. Wouldn't we feel like idiots if we found ourselves on the short end of a court's wrath because we either threw away documents we should have kept, or because we kept documents that we didn't have to and wished we hadn't? Now they understood the value of document management. And actually, I think that article that we wrote about it afterwards is still on the ACC docket. And so if you search for it under my name, you should find it. I think it was called something like, "To Save the Company, Save the Right Documents," something like that. It's got a piggy bank on it. Here's the point. It's not enough for us to know the law. We need to know the business of law. We need to figure out how to bridge the gap between the courthouse and the office. It's not what you say, it's how you frame it. Our goal is to find a way to not simply say no, but to figure out how do we say yes safely. Now, you might be wondering whatever happened to that helicar. Well, I took the chickens way out. I ran to my general counsel, having so catastrophically failed at everything else, and I ran to the head of our quality assurance division, which I also supported, and I gave them the problem, and they said the thing that I had been trying so hard not to say. No, we will not kill 25% of our customers to release this product early. Well, that was the right outcome, but the fallout was also pretty bad. That helicar had to go back to the drawing board, and the engineers had to work on it. It cost us time. We blew the deadline that we had given the market. It cost a boatload of money. We went way over budget. The CEO of our parent company wanted to fire us all. It was bad. It was bad. But in the end, the product launched, and it was very successful. Here's the thing that bothered me, though. I was called in after decisions were made, after the money was spent, after the launch calendar was set. If I had known about the bridge framework back then, I could have been invited to the table sooner, and we might have prevented some of that angst that we endured. And so I invite you all not to go through the pain that I had to go through, or at least anymore, and try that bridge framework. Business impact first. Put risk in the context of your stakeholders' interests. Invite collaboration at every step. Allow data to drive the decisions. Give options. And always find creative ways to educate through stories. Because at the end of the day, it's not the smartest lawyer, it's not the one who knows the law who's going to be most successful, but the one who gets heard.